Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Child Anxiety Fact Podcast. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I'm the owner of Child Anxiety Support, a membership for parents of anxious kids. I have my master's in clinical counseling and additional postgraduate training in child anxiety disorders, including exposure and response prevention and the Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions program, or SPACE program, which was designed by Dr. Ellie Lebowitz of the Yale Child Study Center. I'm also certified in infant-toddler mental health. FACT stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and each week I'll be answering your questions about childhood and teen anxiety. Let's get started. Today's question is, what should we do about our anxious child's negative self-talk? For example, I'm terrible, I'm stupid, I'm the worst player ever, etc. The person goes on to say, my child is incredibly talented and none of what they say is true, but no amount of positive reinforcement seems to help. This is such a great question because it's really common. I often get calls from parents looking for help just because of this kind of negative self-talk. Parents get more and more worried, especially if the negative self-talk escalates. The first thing I ask parents to consider when they contact me about this behavior is, when is it occurring? Anxious children will often say these kinds of things when they are trying to confront their anxiety in some way, but are failing. For example, a child who is worried about failing a spelling test might say this when they try to study. Or a child who is struggling to go into school alone might be sitting in the car unable to get out and go in and start saying things like this. They may also say it when they realize their parent is frustrated or unhappy with how things are going, or if they think their parent is frustrated or unhappy. And many, many children who are on the fight end of fight, flight, and freeze say it after their meltdown. They look around at their trashed room or at their unhappy family, and they feel pretty terrible about it. And then they say, I'm the worst. I'm a bad kid. If your child is saying these statements in the context of their anxiety, then this is a clear indication that it is part of their anxiety. Anxious kids are anxious, right? And one of the things they're anxious about is being able to measure up. They're worried that they're not good enough, not strong enough, and not capable enough. They are anxious about their anxiety, and they are confusing their anxiety with themselves because, of course, they are. The more anxious a child is, then the more their anxiety is ruling their lives, and the more they may feel like the most central, most important thing about themselves is their anxiety. Anxiety lies to us. It tells us that all the dogs will bite, and that thunderstorms will turn into tornadoes and whirl us away, and that our friends are just waiting to laugh at us, and it tells us the lie that we aren't good enough. That's a pervasive lie of anxiety. Anxiety robs us of our self-esteem. The more that we are limited by our anxiety, the more that we are avoiding or limiting ourselves and our loved ones, the worse we feel about ourselves. Other kids can spend the night places. Other kids can speak up in class. Other kids, maybe even our siblings, aren't driving our parents crazy. No wonder anxious kids often feel bad about themselves. And this is true even for the kids who are successful. Perfectionist, anxious kids may be performing at a very high level of functioning, but they still feel bad about themselves. That's because their best is never good enough, and they always feel one mistake away from everything falling apart. Perfectionist, anxious kids are all or nothing kids. That means they're absolutely 100% fantastic, or they are abject failures. And this is why it's so important that we and our children get support around anxiety. Anxiety goes hand in hand with depression, in large part because anxiety does such a number on our sense of self. It tells us those lies that we are not good enough, that we must remain small to stay safe. It tells us that we have to avoid a venture in order to stay protected, or that we must be perfect in order to deserve love. If you have a child who is saying rotten things about themselves, there are a couple of things to know. The first is that reassuring them that they are wonderful, that they are good enough, that they are fantastic is unlikely to help in the moment. If you've taken the Parenting Pitfalls quiz, which you can find at my site, childanxietysupport.com, just look in the menu at the top, then you know that reassurance is one of those pitfalls. That means that reassuring our children when they are anxious actually makes them more anxious. That reassurance feels good for a minute, but then our children acclimate to it and need more of it. It's never enough. Yes, it's good to tell our kids how great they are, but when they are feeling anxious and beating themselves up, it's not going to help and it can make things worse. Instead, we can remind them that this is their anxiety talking. We can say things like, your anxiety is trying to keep you small right now, or even, your anxiety is not being very nice to you right now. When they are not feeling anxious, we can explain how this all works. The first part of helping our anxious kids is teaching them how anxiety functions. We should explain that anxiety is our safety system working overtime. It's good to be concerned about our safety, sure, but it's not good to be so concerned that we're missing out or beating ourselves up. We should teach our kids to talk back to their anxiety. Your child says, I'm stupid, and we can say, that's your anxiety talking. What would you like to say back to it? Sometimes this is no good in the moment. When our kids are at their most anxious, they are in survival mode and can't access the higher order thinking that logical reasoning requires. In those cases, we should wait until they are calm and process the negative self-talk then. Again, negative self-talk is in itself a form of anxiety in anxious kids, and reassurance is going to make things worse, which brings us to our own anxiety. It's really difficult to hear our kids trash talk themselves. It's painful and it can be scary. Of course, we feel anxious when we hear their anxiety coming out this way. So, how do we handle that? In much the same way. First, we learn how anxiety works, ours and our child's. Second, we learn how to manage anxiety, ours and our child's. We learn to think in two modes, in the moment, dealing with what's right in front of us, and also big picture, dealing with anxiety as a whole. That means having a plan for in the specific anxious moment that feeds our larger plan of helping our anxious child long term. In short, if your child is full of negative self-talk, then 1, educate them about anxiety and how it shows up, including making us think mean things about ourselves that are supposed to keep us small and safe, but really end up keeping us small and unhappy. 2, make a plan for what we'll say to them in the moment, which might be something like, your anxiety has its mean voice on today, or sounds like your anxiety is really trying to keep you small. 3, create a long-term family plan to support your child in dealing with and facing their anxiety. 4, create a long-term plan to support you in dealing with any anxiety you have in parenting an anxious child. Have questions about this topic or something else you want to ask? Just let me know. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you have a question you would like me to answer on the show, please go to childanxietysupport.com/FAQ. And if you'd like to learn more about the Child Anxiety Support membership, please go to childanxietysupport.com. The membership offers courses, live events, and community to help you design a personalized program to free your family from the trap of child anxiety. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the podcast and sharing it with any friends or family who you think might find it helpful. You can get more of my child anxiety content over at Instagram, where I'm Dawn Friedman, MSED, or on Facebook at the Child Anxiety Support page. Thanks again and have a great week.